Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Jones, the President and CEO of the Foundation for Child Development. It is the Foundation's great pleasure to host this afternoon's webinar on the work of Dr. James P. Comer. This event is the second in our new series on scholars of color. Promoting scholarship to inform policy and practice is at the heart of the Foundation's work, and we execute that charge primarily by supporting early career researchers through our Young Scholars and our Promising Scholars programs. But we also believe that looking back at the work of preeminent scholars of color will broaden our understanding of their seminal contributions and focus our perspectives as we face the challenges of this moment in history. The Scholars of Color series began in February with the discussion of the work of Dr. Asa Hilliard, and today we will focus on the work of Dr. James Comer. On May 25th, we will review the work of Dr. Cynthia Garcia Cole. Each scholar's work will be highlighted in a 2-hour webinar, followed by a working paper. A recording of each webinar will be hosted on the Foundation's website, along with handouts and resources that will allow a more in-depth review of the scholar's work. You can download additional resources on Dr. Comer's work directly from the handouts section on the screen at any time during this webinar. On behalf of the Foundation, I extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. Comer, his colleagues and friends for their invaluable assistance to this project. We have an esteemed panel today, and we're honored to have as our moderator, psychologist, educator, and author, Dr. Valerie Mahones. Having been a faculty member at the Yale Child Study Center, where she served in numerous capacities with the Comer School Development Program, Dr. Mahones has a keen insight into Dr. Comer, the man, his work, and his legacy. We've decided to assume an informal tone for today's conversations, so Valerie, I leave the rest of the day in your very capable hands. Valerie, you're not on yet, but.
Here we go. Now I'm unmuted. Thank you, Jackie. We are just grateful to the Foundation for this opportunity, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve as moderator for this second Scholars of Color series, which will highlight the paradigm-shifting work of Dr. James Comer, psychiatrist, author, educator, and advocate for child development and well-being. Today, we will have 3 panel discussions focused on Dr. Comer, the man, his work, and his legacy and relevance to current issues facing us today. So first, let me start by just introducing Dr. Comer. Dr. James P. Comer is the Maurice Falk Professor of Child Psychiatry at the Yale University School of Medicine at the Child Study Center in New Haven, Connecticut. He is nationally and internationally known for his 1968 creation of the Comer School Development Program. Dr. Comer's pioneering work in school restructuring has been featured in numerous newspaper, magazine, and television reports, and it's been published in many academic journals. He's the author of 10 books, including Maggie's American Dream and Leave No Child Behind, and he's the recipient of many honors and awards, including 49 honorary degrees. In 2014, President Barack Obama appointed Dr. Comer to the President's Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. His accomplishments are too numerous to outline in the time allotted here, so you may find Dr. Comer's full biographical sketch on the Foundation website. We have an exciting lineup of featured speakers for this first panel who will share their perspectives and insights on today's theme. This first panel will discuss Dr. James Comer, the man, highlighting his early life and work, his philosophy, and the principles that motivated him to do his work. The second panel will share specific insights about Dr. Comer's work and provide details regarding the internationally acclaimed school development program. And our final panel will discuss the Comer legacy and the relevance of his work to contemporary issues we are facing today. So we've got an august group assembled here, and you can read more about the panelists from each session on the Foundation's website. With such a dynamic group of speakers, I want to go over some logistics first because I know you will all have many questions and will want the resources for this session. So you may download the resources from the handout section. And also today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Foundation's website so that you may view it at your leisure and as many times as you wish. Please keep in mind that you may submit questions anytime during today's panel discussions using the Q&A feature. At the conclusion of the 3 panel discussions, I will call all of the panelists together for Q&A and for final remarks. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the panelists for the first session, Dr. Comer, the man. I would like to introduce Dr. Hugh Price, former president and CEO of the Urban League, Dr. Norris Haynes of Southern Connecticut State University, and Dr. Tim Shriver of Special Olympics International. Before we bring this group to the virtual roundtable, first of all, I want to say welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Before we start our discussion, we will view a video clip of Dr. Comer himself discussing his early life and the factors that influenced him, ultimately leading to the conceptualization of his work. So now please turn your cameras off, and we will invite our audience to turn their attention to the video clip of Dr. Comer. Thank you all. We'll resume momentarily. So let's begin with this wonderful resume of your work and all of the things that you've accomplished throughout your career. Who or what influenced your work?
It was my family, my mother and father in particular, but all of my siblings also contributed as we grew up and as models and role models for me. That was important. What contributed was the fact that we had a joyful, fun-loving, curious, caring family environment, and we had a ball. At the same time, we were expected and encouraged to achieve and to be successful in our goals, to have goals. So it was that combination that really made it possible. But then a couple things happened in particular that as we were succeeding, I had friends who looked like me, who were just as smart and just as able as anybody in our racially integrated school. And yet many of them, despite their abilities, went on a downhill course. Yeah. And that question was why? What was the difference? I couldn't see it. And eventually, as I trained, I began to see the kind of experiences that children need, that I had that they didn't receive, even though their parents were good people who wanted them to succeed. It was that desire and intentional effort on the part of my parents to focus on our development. They understood development intuitively. Yeah. And it was the focus on development that really made the difference. Both the caring, the love, the excitement in the family, the things that we did, that was a big part of it. But then it was also the guidance and the sanctions and the things they did not want to happen. All of that got conveyed to us in indirect but very powerful kinds of ways. And I've come to believe that that's the critical difference between success and difficulty for children. And it's that when the parents can provide that kind of support, and if not the parents, the neighborhood, the schools, the communities, whatever kinds of activities they're in, but it's everybody together has to provide experiences that help children grow, develop, and be able to express themselves, solve problems in a way that works for them and the people around them.
Thank you all for joining us. So for the first question, I'm going to start the session by asking questions and ask each of you to respond. And I'm going to start, Dr. Haynes, with you as a researcher and scholar. I will then ask Hugh and then Tim to chime in. So for this first question, I'd like to know, what is the most important thing for the audience to know and to understand about Dr. James Comer, the person? Dr. Haynes, what say you?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Val. And thank you for the opportunity to speak about my good friend and mentor for 37 years, Dr. Comer. I came to Yale as a young professor from Howard University. I loved Howard. I loved the folks there. And I still do. But I have to say that when I came in 1985 to the Child Study Center to interview for the position with Dr. Comer, my life changed forever, really. It was an amazing experience. I thought I was coming for an interview, and it was indeed an interview, but it turned out to be much more than that. It turned out to be a conversation that I would never forget. And so I did tell the folks at Howard that I would be back, and they decided to hold the position there for 3 years, you know. But I just realized that being in the presence of Dr. Comer and learning from him was one of the greatest opportunities that a young professional African-American male could have, working with this wonderful man. And so, so I would say that one of the very important attributes of Dr. Comer is his deep caring for others and his his interest in improving the lives of those with whom he come into contact. And so I think this this attribute of deep caring and wanting to help others find their voice, as he did help me find my voice and find my my way professionally and personally, is something that's reflected in his work. And so it is very challenging, I think, to separate the man from his work, because in my own personal experience and my personal journey with Dr. Comer for the past 37 years, is one that tells me that who he is as a person does find expression in the work that he has started and the work that he continues to do. So I will end there, and I look forward to answering some more questions about Dr. Comer and his work and the man.
And Hugh, what would you say? Would you agree with that assessment? The man and his work are inextricably linked.
I think that's true. I think for me, the most enduring takeaway about his life is his profound understanding of how children learn and develop, and how those two phenomena are inextricably linked, and his understanding of they should learn and develop and why they don't. My exposure to Dr. Comer dates back to 1968 or 1969 when we enrolled our eldest daughter in one of the first schools that he began with the SDP. We lived across the street from Martin Luther King School, and we heard there was this big experimental school across the street, and there was this man named Dr. James Comer who had a vision. So we experienced the SDP very, very early in its incarnation as parents and saw the power of it. Another thing that I recall from that very early experience is his statement that parents and educators and school staff and community, they use this phrase, should be locked in a conspiracy to make sure that all of the children succeed. Dr. Comer is truly a visionary, but unlike many visionaries who can't get beyond the vision, he is what the Reverend James Forbes of Riverside Church used to say. He has the ability to tangibilitate his vision, to turn it into actual models for school improvement. The last thing I'd say is that Dr. Comer has a passion for this work, which is extraordinary. He is amazingly persistent, and he has the patience of Job. I've heard that story about his family for the last 60 years, and it never gets old, it never gets tired, it never ceases to resonate. And that is the sign of a true, passionate visionary.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Tim, what say you?
Well, I'll pick up where Hugh left off, and my good friend Maurice Haynes, who came to the Child Study Center at the time, just at the time I was finishing. So I think we're both at about 38 years now, Maurice, in the presence and under the tutelage of Dr. Comer. We're not quite where Hugh is, but we're blessed beyond measure. Hugh, I'll pick up where Dr. Price just left off with Dr. Comer's family. The year I was at the Child Study Center, I was a young teacher, and he was working on his book, Maggie's American Dream, and he took me, for whatever reason, into his confidence to help with reading drafts of the manuscript and so on. And I was also his driver, which was not a good situation because I like to get to every place at the last minute. He liked to get there an hour early. So I learned. I was trained by him to be a little better on these things. But what I noticed, Valerie, is how deeply this story that Hugh refers to, that Dr. Comer just told, animates everything about him. I think his mom really is the narrator of this tale. And when I came to Dr. Comer, the headlines in the newspaper about him were about parent involvement. And it shows how far we've come. In those days, a novelty, which shows people no longer, I don't believe, question the importance in the life of their children, but in some ways awkward, uncomfortable, and even shunned. Dr. Comer, because of his own mother, who he refers to in many different ways as this genius of child development, as a person who did not have a lot of formal education, but who understood boundaries, supports, love, joy, all the qualities he described. In some ways, I think what Dr. Comer tried to communicate, at least to me, was that every mother has that within them. And every mother wants good things for their children. But our systems don't make it easy for them. In fact, our systems make it hard for them. In fact, our systems have counter forces that actually make development and the support of moms and parents difficult. And in some ways, the entire scientific enterprise that Dr. Comer brought to bear, the child development knowledge that he was talking about, which is, by the way, out in recent years by neuroscience. We didn't have much any neuroscience in the 70s and 80s when I was starting in education. But now we have neuroscience that talks about how that shows us that the brain, the social centers, the moral centers, the ethical centers, the cognitive centers, the emotional centers are all interacting and all essential to learning. Dr. Comer learned that from his mom. And I think what I always remember about the finishing of that book, and I've asked him, by the way, I have, many people I'm sure here have read all of Dr. Comer's books, but I've asked him I think at least twice, what's his favorite book? And he always does say Maggie's American Dream, because in that book, he told a story of a woman who believed in this country, who believed in her children, who believed in family, who believed in development, and who understood all those things. As she often said, Jimmy, all you teach is common sense. And Dr. Comer would respond to his mom, even in those days, Mom, it's uncommon common sense. She is the uncommon common sense carrier of this conversation and of the game-changing, really era-defining shift that Dr. Comer brought to so many. I'll close by saying about the man, I was 24 years old when I knocked on his door saying I wanted to come study with him. I had no real claim or credibility to make that request. But as Hugh said, the one thing I did share with him, I was only relented and let me consent. And he'd finally come and spend a year. I wish, and in the child study, hope that their careers get the exposure because paradigm shift, a way of pioneer. There in which when it's lucky Dr. Comer's capacity to influence the way you think. That every way I saw children, families, schools, as Nora said, schools, curriculum, instruction, testing, you name it, strategy, planning, management, mental health, discipline, everything was changed. And I guess I'll just close by saying, in some ways, everything was changed because Maggie Comer had an American dream enough to teach the dream and believed in children to fulfill it. And it's our job, I think, we have our job to continue that work.
Thank you, Tim. We had a little bit of a delay and some technical difficulties there, but I hope the audience captured that last part. I hope the audience captured that last part. It was just wonderful. And so for this next question, Hugh, I'll start with you. So you met Dr. Comer, you were working in, you're bringing your children to the schools and you engaged in this program with your children and families, but what can we learn from him and from this really kind of profound, unprecedented way of engaging families and communities? What can we learn from Dr. Comer, the man? And as Tim pointed out, even from his mother, we know that that's what drove him to do his work. What else can we learn from him? What are other drivers that were compelling for Dr. Comer to do that work?
Well, I think that one of the facets of children's learning and development that we easily overlook is the role of community. There are some family situations where the levels of support aren't as robust as they ought to be. And there are some schools that do not focus on children's social, emotional, and academic development to the extent that they ought to. But there are community institutions that can fill the void. There are churches, there are youth development agencies, there's an entire infrastructure, there are youth bureaus, there's an entire infrastructure of organizations in the community that can support the development of children. There are also institutions that can destroy the development of children, namely the gangs and the streets. And those forces have to be counteracted as best we can. So building up and celebrating the role of community in the development of children is as important as focusing on what transpires during the school day and what happens at home, because as Dr. Comer has said, all of the adults must be locked in a conspiracy to ensure the development of children. And it's a 24-hour-a-day proposition throughout their childhood and adolescence.
So it sounds to me that this whole, notion of staying with it, it's a 24/7 proposition. Everybody has to be together, and that's not an easy task to do. So we have to stay with it and continue and be determined to see children through all their developmental milestones. Norris, what do you say about that? What are other drivers, and what can we learn and take away from Dr. Comer, the man, and all of the things that inspired him to do the work that we're doing?
Well, when we think of transformational leaders, we think of the fact that transformational leaders are recognized for their vision, for their capacity to inspire others, and for their ability to help change institutions and organizations, as Dr. Comer certainly changed the way we've thought of education, and he's changed schools and school districts. But most importantly, I think that something that sets Dr. Comer aside perhaps from other persons we might identify as being transformational is his capacity to transform the lives of those people around him. And by virtue of what the literature calls his referent power, R-E-F-E-R-E-N-T, his referent power. There are people who influence other people's behavior through reward power or information power and other kinds of sources of power. But for Dr. Comer, in my experience, it has been by virtue of who he is and what he stands for, and the kinds of support and genuine caring that he demonstrates. And so one of the lessons that I've taken away from my 37 years of association with Dr. Comer and mentorship by him, and 38 years, as Tim corrected me, 38 years, because Tim and I were in the same office space.
We're getting old, Norris.
During these years. That's right. And then Hugh, I remember Hugh coming to my home actually to pick up a proposal that we'd written. And I thought to myself, wow, Dr. Comer, what commitment. The president of the Rockefeller Foundation is coming to my home to pick up a proposal to support Dr. Comer's work. That's referent power. That shows the influence that Dr. Comer has had on so many people, including Hugh Price and Tim Shriver and myself and others who have worked with him, and you yourself, Valerie. So I have learned that it is not about what you can give to people or what you can reward them by, but it is by the way you live and by the qualities that you demonstrate that people want to emulate. And so Dr. Comer, for me, has been a wonderful example. And I have learned so much from him in terms of how to live my life in terms of influencing people in a positive way.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Tim, in the remaining 2 minutes that we have left, what say you? Can you?
I'll try. I like to echo everybody's comments, but I won't bore people. I'll try to make two other very quick points, Val. First, I think it's important to note that Dr. Comer is often frustrated and disappointed and angry at our country. And the outrage, disappointment, the frustration that comes from seeing so many children not helped, not supported, hurt, damaged, left behind. I've been with Dr. Comer many, many times where he's scratching his head and pulling at his neck and just frustrated that the country just so slow, that we educators are so slow, that there's so much resistance. Why? I see him, the resistance. So part of this man is a man on a mission because he sees a demand that has not been met. You introduced him as Maurice Falk professor, not professor emeritus. There's work to be done. And I think every professor, person I know, there's work to be every person who's made a difference in a little bit of anger, not necessarily much, world, a bit of anger. necessarily too much, but enough of that kind of persistence and to keep your edge and to keep your force. And I guess I'll just say the one other thing is that, Val, you know this because we've talked about it. Dr. Comer wants big, and I think as a psychiatrist, great child psychiatrist, wanting people to him in this way, a great psychiatrist, to see differently. Shortcuts, you know, new curriculum, new training programs, new this, new that. It's good as long as it leads to a big breakthrough. And he has urgency about the urgency of a mind-shifting breakthrough, not
Having a little bit of a delay here,
easy to do.
But
he stayed at it. And those two qualities mentioned, I think, have led, in addition to the others that have been mentioned, to his work, which I dare say, I hope he doesn't mind me saying it.
We have a little bit of a delay in the response, but we're going to hold those thoughts until we get back all together for the Q&A at the end of the third panel. Tim, Hugh, and Norris, I just want to thank you for your insights and your perspectives on Dr. Comer, the man, and for engaging in this exciting discussion with us. Thank you so, so much. And now I'd like to welcome the second panel in this webinar titled Dr. Comer, His Work. I'll introduce the panelists for this session. Dr. Faye E. Brown, Director of Child and Adolescent Development. Dr. Camille Cooper, Director of Teaching and Learning, both at the Comer School Development Program. And Ms. Jan Stoklinski, also of Yale University. And before we begin this discussion with this wonderful group of scholars, we will now turn to another video clip in which Dr. Comer describes his work.
Very open to the involvement and the engagement of parents. At the same time, I brought the kind of the knowledge of development to that situation that was not there before. But I also discovered that many of the educators, although they were caring, hard-working people, had little to no child development training. And as a result of that, did the best they could.
Yeah.
And yet weren't getting the kinds of results we wanted because the structure of the schools didn't permit it. And the preparation of the teachers before they got there and all the other people in schools, it was not what was required to create a culture in school. So you can have a culture at home that supports development, but if it doesn't follow into school, you then have a problem. And so we had to create a culture in school that worked to support the development of children, which means that
Welcome back. I'll welcome back our panelists for this segment. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to start this discussion with you first, Dr. Brown, followed by Dr. Cooper, and then Jan Stoklinski. Please share from your view Dr. Comer's most pivotal ideas, his theories, research findings, policy or practice recommendations, specific to the particular aspects of the Comer School Development Program. Dr. Brown, the virtual microphone is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mahones. It is certainly a pleasure to be here with everyone. When I think about Dr. Comer's ideas, the thing that comes to mind for me is actually the entire school development program model. And so for the benefit of those who are joining us today who may not be familiar with the model, I would just love to take a few minutes just to situate this model within the schematic of what we call the SDP schoolhouse, and really to quickly offer a way of helping folks to understand how this model really helps to bring about great changes in school. And so thank you for the schoolhouse model. So as we can see on the screen, this is really the schematic that we tend to use to depict the SDP. We tend to say at the SDP that it's a 9-element model sitting on a solid foundation. And so just to quickly help folks to understand those 9 elements, at the top of the schoolhouse inside the school, we have what we call 3 mechanisms or 3 teams: the parent team, the governance structure, which we call the school planning and management team, and the student and staff support team, formerly known as the mental health team. Not going to say anything much about those 3 teams because I do believe my colleague, Dr. Camille Cooper, will be spending some time helping us to understand more about these 3 teams or 3 mechanisms. But then there are those 3 operations, ways of operating within the school to really move the school forward, to get it to where the educators in that school want to be successful. And so 3 operations. We call the first one the comprehensive school plan. Some schools call it the school improvement plan. It's not what it's called, it's what it does. And so that plan should articulate the goals that the school wishes to accomplish for that year. And not just academic goals, but social goals, sometimes school climate goals, sometimes parent engagement goals, whatever it is that the school really wishes to accomplish that year should be articulated in that plan. And then the other operation is assessment and modification, for the school to really identify ways of doing periodic assessment, looking at and asking the question, what's going right? What's going well? What's not going well? And what should we be doing differently as a school community to really accomplish what we set out to do for the year? Really to look to see what modifications might we need to make in order for us to accomplish the goals that we have articulated. And then the third of the operations is staff development. And we believe at the SDP that staff development should be connected to the goals that are articulated in the plan. It shouldn't just be staff development for the sake of doing staff development. It should be staff development that's embedded, that's meaningful for the staff, especially if it's about programmatic programs that are brought into the school. The idea is that if you bring a program into the school, you should make sure that the folks who are expected to carry out the programs, that they really are sufficiently equipped through professional development or training to know what it is that they need to do in order to be successful in implementing that program. So those are 6 of the 9 elements: 3 teams, 3 operations, and the other 3 of the 9 elements are found at the very top of the schoolhouse. They are the 3 guiding principles. And I have a feeling that Jan Stoklinski will be spending some time on those, because they really are talking about ways that the school community, which includes reaching out to parents, of course, ways that they work together to get the job done in the best interest of kids. And so those 3 guiding principles are: 1, collaboration, working together, understanding that no one person in that school community can do it all by himself or herself. It takes a village after all. So collaboration and respecting what each person brings to the table. And then there is consensus decision making. The idea being that it's not just about throwing out an idea on the table and then just asking to vote yay or nay, because sometimes that leaves a feeling of inclusion for some and exclusion for others. It's about really having discussions, sometimes looking at and tugging with divergent thinking, divergent thoughts, and then coming to agreement about what's in the best interest of our children. That's such an important phrase within the school development program work. And the last of the 3 guiding principles is no fault problem solving. One that we could spend the whole day just going deep about, but we won't. And that is really saying, Dr. Comer was saying with that guiding principle, that there really is limited amount of time in a school day. And it's not if you will have challenges, it's not if problems will arise, it's when they do arise. And so the question becomes, what do you do when those challenges come? Do you spend the little time, the limited time, pointing fingers, blaming one another and shutting people down from getting the work done? Or do you really then put the problem on the table and together brainstorm solutions to try to solve the problem? And so the latter is what he really proposes for us to do, for schools to do. So those are the 9 elements, 3, 3, and 3. 3 teams or structures that Dr. Cooper will take us through a little bit more, I'm sure. 3 operations, just how you get it done to accomplish success, and then 3 guiding principles. And at the base of all of that, at the foundation, Dr. Comer talked about this in the video. It's about, he has a way of saying, all of those, they are in the service of one important thing: providing support for the development and the learning for our kids. Development, development, development along 6 critical pathways: the physical, the cognitive, the language, the social, the ethical, and the psychological. Saying that, hey, listen, school is not just a place that you go to learn how to do tests or to pass tests. It's a place where there's preparation for life, his favorite phrase. And then at the very base of that schoolhouse, it's about relationships, relationships, relationships that I'm not going to touch much because that's a Jan thing. And so with that, I will pause for now in terms of providing the context for the work that we do, situated within that schoolhouse, with one final thought about all of those elements. As David Reynolds, the historian and educator in Britain, he had a way of saying that it's not about choosing one piece or 2 pieces to do in isolation. If you do it that way, you won't get the results. It's about doing the whole model in a way that you can have the interaction effects among and between those different elements. So I will pause there for now, Dr. Val.
I'm going to make the assumption
There
that
you go. Thank you.
that I will go next in
Yes.
discussing the model and what I see as important. I know that one of the key ideals that I think is really important is the fact that actually learning is development, and that they are linked together. And in working through this system change that Dr. Comer has put forward, it helps the school to do the work that it's charged to do, with the ideal of children's development is the key and the central focus of what happens in the school. I see this as a way of looking at all the resources that are available in the school, harnessing all of those resources, people resources, human resources, material resources, and trying to utilize them as effectively as possible. I know as a a school administrator, I found this program to be a way for me to do my work. I know in some programs, it's another program on top of what they're doing, but this particular program is one in which you look at your parent groups and you look at the skills and abilities, the resources that parents bring, and you try to utilize those in a way that supports the development and that they are able to share some of their expertise with the school in various ways. It helps us to look at different types of parent development. You know, that parents sending their child to school is a parent involvement. But there are also there's a hierarchy, and there are some parents that have skills and abilities that they can actually help with the inner workings of the school. In the planning and management team, that you're able to take the best thinking of all of the personnel in your school and put those individuals together in a team where they think together, they plan together, that they utilize their specific perspective of that school to help them manage what's going on in that school. And this is also an opportunity for administrators to have shared leadership, that it's an opportunity for teachers to learn some leadership where they are able to make some decisions about what is going on in the school. And I've had many administrators that we've worked with through this program that have said they found out skills and abilities and talents that some of their faculty had that they never knew about. And when you are working in isolation, like many schools working traditionally do, that you don't get an opportunity to harness those skills and abilities that your faculty has. And then moving on to the student and staff support team, looking at who are those individuals in your school that have some special skills, your school psychologist, your nurse, your special education teachers, the counselors, that they can work together collaboratively to help teachers address issues that children are having. And the teacher is not left alone trying to figure out what to do with a particular child. You know, that you use your social worker to say, you know, is it something that's happening in the home? Are we looking at the health issues of the child? Are we looking at it as an academic or behavior issues? That this system, the way that the COMER program is organized, that it helps people to work collaboratively and to utilize those human resources in the building so that they can get the best thinking of what's happening in that school. And I'll have to say that administrators, and personally myself as an administrator, that it helped me to learn how to share my leadership. That sometimes it's difficult for people to kind of let go, but that when you start to see how the adults as well as the children are beginning to learn how to develop consensus decision making, learning how to work with no fault problem solving, that you have a continuous learning environment. So it is a good place for children. It is a good place for adults. And I'd like to think about it in terms of, you know, we know Dr. Comer's a medical doctor. He's a psychiatrist, and he studied public health. And one of the ways that I like to think about our program is it's like making the school environment healthy so that children can have the kinds of support and environment for learning. I kind of look at it like, oh, it's kind of like a public health initiative that happens within a school, that when you have a healthy environment, people work together well and children are able to learn well. So that's just a little bit about what I think the genius is of the school development program and the way that it is organized and utilizes this team concept to utilize the best thinking and the best resources of those within the school.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Jan, while we're still on the schoolhouse, you have any comments to wrap this up, and then we'll have to move on to our next aspects of the program.
I would like to do the child center, work with a child center planning model slide.
All right. Next slide, please. The next slide. Thank you.
And for me, this is part of the genius of the model. And Faye talked about a few minutes ago about relationships and child development being the foundation. I've been doing this process. I met Dr. Comer in '85, and it took me a number of years to kind of get it because it seemed, as he always says, so simplistic. But it's the way the teams work together to get the work of the school done, as Faye and Camille talked about. So if you look right in the middle there, it talks about our teaching and learning block. And that, to me, that's critical to everything, because we sometimes forget the relationships between instruction, curriculum, relationships, and child development. And I think until you understand that piece, the rest of the work is more difficult. If you think about the most skilled teacher, the most skilled teacher is not the teacher who just knows curriculum or just knows how to deliver, the instructional delivery well to all kids, but it's that teacher who takes the time to build those relationships, not only with the children in her classroom, but also with the families in the community. So as Hugh said a few minutes ago, you're building that you're locked in a conspiracy of trust. And that can't happen in many communities until the community trusts us as educators. So it's all of that work. And then the teachers have to know about the 6 developmental pathways that Faye talks about so beautifully. Hasn't had a chance yet, but knowing those 6 pathways and how the whole thing connects is critical. And it goes back to a little bit of what Camille talked about. We need our central office people, we need principals, we need everyone who surrounds and should be supporting schools to understand the importance of that. So when they write curriculum, they think about children. What is a kindergarten child like? What is a 9th grader like? What should how should the classroom be set up for them to get the best learning? And I guess I'm real conscious of the time now. We're kind of running out of time. But that is the central part. We call our teaching and learning block, the child center planning. So that should be at the very heart of everything, I believe, that happens in a Comer school. And I'm sorry I was so fast, but.
No, that's wonderful. And we will hold that thought, because we'll have an opportunity maybe to delve into this a little bit more during the Q&A if someone asks that question. In the time that we have remaining, you've heard Dr. Comer talk about development, the centrality of development, both in his early life and his work, and now it's infused in the program. I'm going to ask Dr. Brown if she would close out this segment by talking about the developmental pathways. So if we could have the prior slide, and Dr. Brown, share with us about the Comer process and how it focuses on child development.
Thank you, Dr. Mahones. Dr. Comer, I think, on the video really mentioned that for him, it really is at the heart of the process for him. I mentioned a while ago that when you look at the 9 elements, he normally ends by saying, when schools implement those 9 elements, they're doing it in the service of something very powerful, something very important. And that is, to him, providing support for the development of kids. And so the developmental pathways he actually talked about in terms of the holistic approach. that schools need to really focus on when they're thinking about teaching and reaching every child. And I mentioned quickly a while ago that we're talking about 6 pathways, because very often in schools, we tend, because of the pressures of getting those test scores up, schools tend to focus a lot of attention on the cognitive pathway because it's about achievement. But when they understand, like a lot of people, when they come to our trainings, on Monday, it would be like, we have a week of training. On Monday, it would be like, oh my God, don't tell me that we're going to have to learn something else on top of everything that we have to do. We already have so much to do in terms of teaching kids math and English and science and so on and so forth. When they hear about the 6 pathways, it's like something else. But then by the time they learn about it on Tuesday or Wednesday, by Friday, the mindset shifts. And teachers would invariably say, I wish I had this information when I first started teaching. I wish I had these lens through which to see my students. The physical sometimes is the place to start, because sometimes when a child is not reading on grade level, it's not about I can't read. It's not about the cognitive. It's about the physical, because it could be something that's going on with the vision. And so Dr. Comer really helps us to understand that if we think about the holistic perspective and pay attention not only to the cognitive, but the physical, the language, the social, the ethical, the psychological, then we really will find that we are on the right path to truly educating our kids. And that's like in a nutshell, because as Jan said, in the sake of time during Q&A, we can come back to this, but for the sake of time, just to have that holistic perspective of kids and to use that to help teachers to learn how to infuse that developmental understanding into everything they do on a daily basis.
And that is wonderful. And what a wonderful way to tie up this segment to talk about Dr. Comer's work. We started out with him talking about his childhood and development in his early life influences, and for his work to have child development as a centerpiece of it. What a wonderful way to wrap up that segment. Thank you, Dr. Brown, Dr. Cooper, Ms. Doklinski, for your contributions to this segment and for sharing with us how these components of the model work together to support the development and well-being of children. Thank you again. So now we come to the final panel in today's webinar. I am going to welcome the participants of the third panel who will be focusing on relevance to today, Dr. Comer's work and its relevance to issues and concerns that we're wrestling with and dealing with in today's society. So joining us on this panel are Dr. Jonathan Gillette of Lesley University, Dr. Ann Levette of Savannah-Chatham County Public Schools, and Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond of the Learning Policy Institute. I invite you to turn your cameras on and please join us for this wonderful conversation. I'm just thrilled to have this discussion with each of you. So we're just going to get right to it. I'm going to ask Dr. Gillette to get us started in this conversation, and then to be followed by Dr. Levette and then Dr. Hammond. Dr. Gillette, you have a wonderful career focused on teaching and learning, and also the science of implementation in this work. From your perspective, and all of you from your perspectives, what do you see as the current relevance of Dr. Comer's work in promoting child development and fostering school improvement?
Thank you, Dr. Mahones. I want to just go back to something that Dr. Price mentioned, is that Dr. Comer wasn't just an advocate for child development, but created a systemic approach to creating an environment that sheltered children from the kind of negative images, the difficulties that may be around them, so that they could be fully developed to their fullest extent. And what's interesting about that now is there's almost no school you can go into that doesn't have a planning team, doesn't have have all these different parts of the operation and have picked up at least on those elements of Dr. Comer's work. But even in schools that we had, as you know, back when we were at our height, we could have schools that we would call Comer's on the wall, but not in the hall. And, you know, they have a big Comer poster, but you can feel in the room, just watching the interaction between adults and kids, that the culture, the demand on adults to live by the 3 guiding principles had not been met. And I think that's one of the things that's critically important, is that Dr. Comer knew that you can't just bring people with different perspectives together. The real interesting thing is, even though schools are bureaucratic, Dr. Comer recognized they have very poor mechanisms to resolve differing perspectives. And they're often very afraid of conflict. So you go out and the conflict is mostly in the parking lot instead of the adults themselves working together to work it out. So it's really critical that all elements of the Comer process be in play. The second big thing that's relevant is I think we don't recognize how disruptive it is in schools to take a developmental perspective.
Yeah.
And secondly, that those folks who first go toward the development perspective are the very people in schools that have the least power. So we would often find that parents found the development perspective named what they didn't feel their kids were getting. And teachers who are extraordinary in their classroom found the development perspective actually named what they just sort of thought it was, you know, Jack's great teaching methods, but with a developmental language, they knew that it was the relational power they used. They knew it was how they attended to differences in kids. Well, so now you've made a great start, but as we know in systems, people who are near the bottom have fewer power, have very few channels. And Comer validized those perspectives, gave voice to those who could advocate for child development. And really, the whole SDP story is a story of advocacy from the bottom up. First, from teachers and parents to get the system of the administration to go along, then schools that became Comer schools advocating to their district, don't mess this up, because those mandates up there are not meeting. Or we now have child-based services, but our teachers are finding the very limited time we have. We got to manage the competition for a kid's time. These are timeless, important elements of the Comer process that need to go along with the advocacy for child development. And it is a legacy that is just extraordinary and is needed now more than ever.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, those are powerful images, Comer on the wall, but not in the halls. I remember that. Dr. Levette, you have been involved in all levels of the system, from the school board, superintendent, just, you know, so many levels. Tell us where you think this program has relevance to today's issues.
Well, I want to thank you and all of my colleagues for just sharing with the world how important we believe this process is and how important Dr. Comer's work has been to transforming education. And I think where we are today is really an engraved invitation for us to examine the work. It's an opportunity. The pandemic, while nobody wants to talk about it, it's really an opportunity for us to examine, evaluate, and reset. We are seeing a real need for the process to be fully implemented because students are indeed experiencing learning, behavior, and emotional issues. Even the most recent reports, recently discussed even last week, spoke to the impact of the pandemic on students' mental health. It was taboo to even talk about it before now. The staff and the families are stretched and they're stressed. And there's been disruption to all things that we call normal to this point, to our typical operations and our ways of life. So the pandemic really invites us to look at those processes that give attention to the full way that we all develop. We are now, because of the pandemic, given the opportunity to examine the importance of human development. We're looking at how people grow, how they develop, how they respond to change. And in our work together there at the Child Study Center, we talked about the impact of change. What did it take? How could we get people to finally recognize that there are really 6 ways that people grow and develop? The pandemic invites us to think about What's been the impact of the pandemic on the physical development of people? What's been the impact of the pandemic on our cognitive? And why is it that beginning with No Child Left Behind, everything was about cognitive development and academic achievement, when now people really value the full development of kids? The psychological development, how much time have we spent lately talking about where people are socially, emotionally, language-wise, and definitely we've been talking about ethics. So now the 6 developmental pathways really mean something. You know, they say crisis and opportunity come wrapped in the same package. So we had this 100-year pandemic, and we don't need to waste this opportunity. We now understand the value of all the pathways. And we understand that now everything is in reset mode, particularly as Jack said, and as my colleagues have said, school improvement. Now we're having to reset how we define success. Before, success was test scores. Now success is not only attendance, but how students are feeling, how staff is feeling, and how are we managing through the bureaucracy. How much bureaucracy do we really need? And how are we making access to much needed services, in addition to academic services, available to our students, our families, and our staff? Our academic performance, people are finally getting it, is built on and influenced by growth along all the pathways. You know, we did get it finally that we needed to have school breakfast. We got it. USDA, now we're petitioning them. Meals have been free all this time. Why not just let it be a part of what we do? Because we recognize the importance of children having healthy meals. So all of those things have become more important. They're much more amplified. Climate and relationships. I sent a note to Dr. Comer where it's more often repeated now. Relationships matter. And we've known that all along, but now people are really paying attention to it. And then full engagement by our stakeholders is really important. The guiding principles, partnerships, they're all important. While we've known they've been important, and Dr. Comer wrote about it many, many years ago, people are now getting it. And it shouldn't take this long, but I will say I did not appreciate the pandemic, but I have appreciated the fact that the pandemic gave us an engraved invitation to look at the mechanisms, to look at the principles, and to look at the foundation of what we do together to ensure that children are recognized and that their growth is fostered by a full recognition of who they are individually and how our systems support them. Thanks for allowing me to share on that question.
Thank you, Anne. And this is such a nice segue to Linda, because Linda, I just remember our work with NCAID and all the different kinds of things that we did to get child development to be, as you would say, the spine of teacher education. So tell us now, you know, looking back at all the work that we've done and your role now, tell us, even looking forward, what's the relevant day from your perspective, and what, if anything, do we still need to do?
I really appreciate that. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, great. I've had some trouble with my technology this morning. You know, just as Anne said and Jack said, this is, you know, has always been relevant, but there's a new awareness of the relevance in the course of the pandemic. And, you know, as we have been kind of coming out of the No Child Left Behind era, where it was all focused on test scores as though anything else would be a distraction from that. I've been involved in a couple of things that really bring the relevance to life. One is I'm in a project with a variety of other researchers on the science of learning and development, trying to synthesize what we know from neuroscience, you know, people looking at brains and how the architecture is built, from developmental and learning sciences, and from all of the other disciplines about how people develop and learn. And, you know, Jim's been saying this forever, that it's, you know, development and learning. I used to say learning and development, and he would correct me every time, development and learning. are totally integrated. Of course, they're very much the same thing. And one of the things we see from the science as it has emerged and become really understood is that social and emotional and academic and cognitive learning are all completely interrelated. That's not like there's a part of the brain over here for, how you feel and emotional, and another part over here for math and, et cetera. It's all completely interrelated, and the way in which we develop is integrated as well. But just in terms of what we experience in the learning process. Oh, I'm getting an echo. Are you getting an echo? Okay. What we experience in the learning process is that if we feel comfortable in an environment, if we feel trust, if we feel belonging, if we do not feel stigmatized or traumatized, we're much more available for learning and we learn much more effectively. If I come into a setting where I've experienced something that has really caused me to become troubled or distressed, whether it's on the playground or whether it's something that happened at home or something that happened in the hallway, that takes up all my brain space, so to speak. And it really does affect the way in which I learn. It also affects brain architecture and how the brain develops. So we develop most effectively in an environment where we have strong positive relationships and attachments, where there's a lot of consistency, which means that what we experience at home or what we experience at school, are consistent with one another, as well as what we experience around the school when we're there, where there is a lot of interaction, because we learn through interacting with other people. So opportunities to share and to talk. In fact, there's a new study out of Harvard that finds that babies' development of language is not just about how much language they hear, it's about how many times they get to interact in the conversation. So all of those things, the social, the emotional, the cognitive, are developing together, and we can allow kids to develop academically much more effectively when we bring that together in the environment, right? So it's not as though social and emotional learning are a distraction from academic learning. They are the pathway to academic learning. And we see that in the research that shows that when schools engage in these kinds of practices, academic achievement goes up. And many studies of the school development program demonstrate that in and of itself, and then many other studies with similar approaches show the same thing. I was privileged on the 50th anniversary of the Comer School Development Program to pull together at Dr. Comer's request a little book about the program called With the Whole Child in Mind. And it really illustrates not only the brilliance of the understanding that if all the adults in the school could be understanding this together, that you would get better results of many kinds, but also the organizational development side of it, which is these principles of collaboration, consensus, and no-fault problem solving, which are exactly what organizations need to develop themselves in a collective sense. And we see that also in all of the school improvement initiatives that are going on now as people are trying to figure out how to do continuous improvement in schools. Finally, I'll just say I am serving now as the president of the State Board of Education in California, and we have launched a number of initiatives to bring a sort of whole child perspective to the work that professionals do in the school and how they learn at pre-service and in-service, that quest for the child development pathway. And we've just initiated a $3 billion commitment to community schools, which will not only wrap around services for health and mental health, but try to get this shared developmental perspective among teachers and all the other staff that work in the school, and the kinds of supports socially and emotionally and learning opportunities for kids, like the morning meetings that go on in Comer School Development Program schools. We're now seeing that in the restorative practices initiatives. We're bringing it into the community school framework, and it will be part of the technical assistance that we provide for schools that are on this journey. So it is every bit as relevant today as it was 50 years ago, and all of the evolution from all the great practitioners who've been engaged in this work that have continued to make it richer and richer and more thoughtfully implemented we will be trying to build on that and learn from that in the work that we're doing today.
Wonderful. I want to shift a little bit in the time that we have remaining for this last question. And Anne, I'm going to impose on you to start first. There's been a lot of attention to equity, diversity and inclusion, accessibility these days. And how do you see the Comer model being relevant to these kinds of issues of equity, diversity and inclusion, and even in social justice? And what can we learn from the model that can be applied to these principles that we're wrestling with today?
Valerie, thank you for that question. I think it's so important to recognize that Dr. Comer's work was seminal, and that's what we talk about. You know, and Jack's spoken about it. It really does recognize the power of respect for the individual, respect for the fund of knowledge that each individual brings to the situation, and the fact that this land that we are so fortunate to live in has really been based on a diverse group of people coming together through collaboration and through consensus and through strong relationships, making for a place that we can all exist in together. I think when we talk about moving forward in the country or moving forward any place, we have to recognize that each person brings to the table a result of his or her own experience that have value. May not be that we always agree, but the bottom line is when we decide what we want to do together, then we are able then to put our differences aside and work from the inside out. We find what it is that we all agree on, what we all value, and we move forward from there. I think the work that we're looking to do right now, you will find around in schools and organizations where the Comer process is already in place. There is already processes, there are already processes in place to promote consensus, building of skills, building of goals together, ways to measure success as you move to those goals. So I think as we look at social justice, as we look at recognition of our need to be diverse and our need to serve children, then we find those places are already ready to go. The work's already begun. So we can move forward from there. If that is not the case, then we have to teach the process before we can even set the goals. And I think that's why you find people who are looking for the value that each individual brings, the pathways to success, and the goals that reflect the values that we all want, which I believe everyone wants to be loved, respected, and cared about. That's really the core of the school development program.
Yes.
It undergirds all the work, and I believe it's a firm foundation, a solid foundation, a tested foundation for moving forward in the work that we all value and crave around equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Absolutely, and well said, well said. And Jack, what say you in your perspective working with teachers who are looking to go into various kinds of classrooms as they're finishing up their teacher preparation experiences and even in-service teachers? What say you about this and how these principles might apply to today?
You know, Valerie, I have thought a lot about what it meant for Dr. Comer to be a psychiatrist who has such a big impact on educators. And one of the things I know, and especially working with preparing teachers, is they're often like me. They'll go down in the middle of the night, turn on the refrigerator, the light goes on, and they give a speech. We are extraordinary talkers. We think we can talk. We have this deep belief that we can talk anybody into anything. And Dr. Comer's background is one that comes from a deep, respectful poise of listening. And I think a lot of us realize that we could listen people into the Comer process faster than we could talk them into it. And I think especially around issues of equity, it is important for us, and especially for people who look like me, to listen deeply and to hear the commonness that's underneath that at the same time we hear the divergent perspectives. So I think more than ever, in relationship, ready to listen and open up to the fact that we're all there with the same common purpose, and we have passionate ideas how to get there. And we're never going to move unless we really do hear each other in a new and different way.
Absolutely. And Linda, in our minutes remaining, what are your thoughts about this topic?
Well, I just want to say amen to Ann and Jack. I mean, the whole point of seeing the whole child, seeing the whole person, is what allows us to be in human relationship with each other. And it is, essential to really dealing with both the aftermath and the ongoing nature of discrimination and oppression in this country, and the way in which we need to rise up and, understand one another. And see one another, the observation, the listening that people learn to do. I mean, this is part of developing a developmental perspective, is that you learn to think and understand and listen and acknowledge and recognize what each of us brings to the table and how to support that in all of the work that we do going forward. So I think it is, it's fundamental to all of that. And I mentioned earlier that a lot of the principles that Dr. Comer was talking about are being taken up in the work of restorative practices in schools. Mm-hmm. These are practices where, rather than, we have this huge discriminatory disciplinary outcome in this country. Once we started moving towards zero tolerance policies and exclusionary discipline, the outcomes are much, much more problematic and extreme for Black students, for students with disabilities, for Native American students. There's a lot of data on this. And in response to this, we've got a big agenda to reduce that kind of exclusion, to reduce the racial gaps in that. And the restorative practices idea is that, first of all, we build community in schools. So it starts right back with the school development program. Classroom meetings are a very big part of hearing what kids have experienced, figuring out the ways that teachers can understand, support, and enable students to be connected to the school when there's a mishap. I know Dr. Comer has always talked about, and all of the folks who have been involved in the development program, that there's some kind of a challenge between and among people. You don't assume it's because the child is bad or because the other person is probably, is a problem. You assume there's a need, and you try to figure out what that need is, and then you make amends, you repair, repair those relationships, and you build the community. Then that's what restorative practices are doing. We are finding that it has a tremendous effect on student achievement, closing gaps there, as well as on discipline, closing gaps there, and improving mental health, reducing depression, reducing suicidal ideation, all of those kinds of things. That all comes from where we started with the school development program. And that is at the heart of really enabling equitable outcomes in our schools.
Well said, well said. I just want to take this time to thank the three of you for this provocative and inspirational discussion. And I know that Dr. Comer is pleased to hear about how his work has transcended the initial work that he's done in New Haven, Connecticut, and has permeated the ways in which we work and think and engage with each other across a number of disciplines and a variety of sectors. And so without further ado, I am delighted to call to the screen the man of the hour, Dr. James Comer, to join us live for this part of the panel. So Dr. Comer, please turn on your video. We are looking forward to having you join us for this part of the panel and for the Q&A.
I'm here.
Welcome, welcome, Dr. Comer. So I know your ears must have been burning as you were listening to this wonderful, wonderful discussion and the various perspectives that people are taking on this topic. What do you want the audience to take away from hearing this discussion and from the wonderful legacy of your work?
Well, I'm very, very pleased, and you all have presented it so well. I'm going to just tell a couple stories that convey what I'm thinking about. That I was invited to a very affluent early childhood program in the Midwest, and it was more than I'd ever seen for so few children. And I was puzzled about why they invited me. And I asked her, why me? My program, our work, and the work that's getting attention is about poor children. And she said, we invited you because what you're doing with poor children is what all children need and all families need. And as I walked around later, and I could see that their schools looked like our schools because it was not the physical buildings and so on and what they had in a material way. It was the relationships and the way they managed to create and maintain those relationships. And that, I guess, for me, started in my own family. It was what I always tried to promote in whatever school I was in until I saw school as the way to go to change everything. All of the problems of the society that we struggle with, we really will need a re-education, a change in the culture in order to address those problems. And so that work is what I heard here today as we discussed SDP, but also and we talk about frustration. Several people talk about the frustration I've had.
Yes.
To me, it's so simple. And now we know, and it's not only through observation. There's deep science here that helped us come upon what really works for kids and families, and eventually for the whole society. Second story related to deep science. I was given an award, and there was a big celebration, dinner, and so on. And there were a lot of scholars there and people. And one of the scholars called me off in a very secretive kind of way and so on. And she said to me, I know what you're doing. And I was concerned that maybe she knew something. And she said, what you did was you copied your own family life, and you recreated your own family life. And I looked to myself and I said, that's absolutely what we did. But and then I said, well, to myself, I wondered, what was the problem? And what she was saying in a way was that you didn't do it like we do it, and we did it. And I acknowledge that I did not try to do it like we did it and traditional ways of doing things. We were looking for the way that worked, and we were willing to honor all the traditions of science and good science that worked. But where it didn't work, we had to observe, we had to discover, we had to find out, we had to try, we had to ask the custodian, we had to ask the principal, we had to ask whoever has something that they can contribute here. That's what we need in order to find a way to make schools work for all people and all children, regardless of their backgrounds. And so I was pleased as I listened to people talk today, is that you were describing the way that we did that was to create a system that was open, a system that could learn, and a system that produced outcomes that can work best for not only the children and their families, but our society.
Absolutely.
And because
find a way you did. And find a way you did. And what a way that is. Clearly, the work still has so much power and so much motivation and energy behind it. I think we will continue to build on the successes of this program for many, many, many years to come to continue this wonderful work. Thank you, Dr. Comer. And I think it is now time to invite all of the panelists back for the final Q&A. So we will invite the panelists from all three segments of today to come back and to join the man of the hour on the stage. There have been lots and lots of questions coming in. I'm sure you all have been inspired by the conversation today. This has been absolutely wonderful and provocative. There are several things that I put a pin in that I hope we'll get back to today, and that was Maurice Haynes's discussion on referent power, the whole notion of finding a way and the centrality of child development, the applicability of the program to social justice, a whole host of other kinds of ideas that came out of this discussion today that I hope the audience will take away, and I hope that during the Q&A session that we can address a bit more. We have some questions that have come in, and these have started, these questions focus on teacher education. So I'm going to ask Linda and Jack, I'll prime you up first for these questions, and then anybody can weigh in. But the first submitter question is, how do teacher educators use now, or how have they used in the past the Comer program? How do the panelists envision its use in schools of the future? So this is around teacher education. How have they used the program? How will they use it in the future? And what do you envision as a future? I'm going to start with Jack and then Linda, and then we'll open up the floor for the rest of the discussion on this question.
Thanks. I just want to say that when you go back to where Jan was talking about that, what is the work of a teacher? Curriculum, instruction, relationships, and development. I just think having that framework right from the beginning for young teachers, and especially working with mentor teachers. They often work with mentor teachers who are terrific, but can't name their process very well. And if they're asked to sort of put them in those 4 buckets, the conversations just become much richer. I have to say, we have more success with that with our elementary and middle. I still find it challenging to work with high school teachers to really even though adolescence is breaking out all over them, they, for some reason, don't make those connections between where their kids are developmentally as much as middle and elementary, because middle and elementary teachers have much more content in that area. So it's still an area I think we need lots of work to do. But knowing that those 4 things are in the classroom, because any of us who's walked into a classroom, the first thing you feel is relationships. The second thing you notice developmentally how wide a range there is. And then you might see the instruction and curriculum.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to pick right up on that. I taught adolescent development in the Stanford Teacher Education Program for many, many years, and recently did it again. So I hope to continue from time to time. And really for that very reason, that secondary teachers have a very challenging context, right? The factory model school that we've inherited gives you usually, when I was teaching high school English, 180 kids a day, coming by and, on a gerbil wheel, every 50 minutes. You want to understand them well, but you have a very hard time coming to know 180 kids. And a lot of the training has been around the content and maybe the pedagogy that goes with the content. But of course, success for all teachers has to do with development as the basis for learning. So in that class, among other things, in addition to teaching teachers how to be developmental in that context, I've also been involved in starting a lot of schools that change the context, that create small schools in which teachers teach in teams that share students, where they have block scheduling and they see 70 students or 80 students at a time, not 180. So there are all those other things too. But in the context of learning about development, among the things that we did was use the Comer framework, the domains of development, and engage the teachers in identifying a child to work with and follow over the course of the semester, looking at them from all of the areas of development, following them in their school day, shadowing them, talking to the parents, meeting with them, understanding how the child is thinking, how they're experiencing school, about socially, emotionally, talking to them in a variety of ways, and really using that as a basis for getting a framework that will allow you then to understand all your kids from multiple perspectives, giving them tools that they can use in the classroom to learn about their students, whether those are conferencing tools, survey tools, whether those are ways to bring their life experiences into the classroom in their writing, in their assignments, and then building on that, right, to bring the curriculum together. But it's critically important. It's transformative for high school teachers to have access to that way of thinking and looking at the world. And in the context of the work we've done in California, we've now brought that into the licensing standards as well, so that schools of education, when they're accredited, have to build a strong foundation in development and understanding the ways in which to be developmentally supportive of young people when they're teaching in whatever the age level and context is.
Jan or Anne, Camille, any thoughts? Jan.
I got knocked out, so I got knocked out of the whole conversation. I'm just back in.
Well, we're talking about how models of this with the program within teacher education, how it has been used and how it can be used. So while you're thinking about that, maybe Camille and Anne, having worked in school systems and having had pre-service teachers coming into the schools and so forth, you might have some thoughts on this. Camille and then Anne.
I have a thought. Okay.
And then we'll come back to Jan.
Okay. It really makes a difference when the teachers have an understanding of child development and that they utilize the lens of the 6 developmental pathways in working with children, that understanding that they learn in various ways. They may be stronger in one area than in another area, but to have some consciousness of that and to organize their instruction around their understanding of child and adolescent development, that understanding, that relationships are like the foundation of that. And when children feel comfortable, when they have a positive environment within a classroom, they don't feel threatened or afraid, that it definitely helps the learning process. That it's our hope that more universities and teacher prep programs will infuse a practical application of child and adolescent development, that they are exposed to the theories, but it's not always presented in a way that they understand how to apply it practically. So I'll turn over to Anne to kind of take that further.
Right, and I'll make just a few comments so that we can hear from Jan. I've lived as a dean of a school of education, so I've been on all sides of this coin, as you said, yes. Valerie, school board member, teacher, superintendent, and dean of a school of education. The key is that in preparation, we tell our teacher candidates to focus on who the children are, know the children. And what we find is that the current constraints they work within, with a focus on academic achievement, they feel compelled to do that as opposed to teaching the children. And while I would advance the position that the teachers have a natural understanding of how children grow and develop, but I think the constraints in which they work often force them to ignore that and to behave as if all the children are to perform and grow at the same rate. I do believe we have the opportunity, as I said earlier, to reshape the environment to reflect a more personalized approach, a different way of measuring success that allows the children and the teachers to function in a natural environment, where I recognize the difference between a 5-year-old and a 5-year-old in 6 months. We recognize that and we pay attention to it. But the older the children get, the less we recognize the differences in how they grow and develop. There are differences based on culture, differences based on gender, differences based on age, and other factors. We have to acknowledge that. I do think this is an invitation for us to do so. And teachers will welcome that, and they have had that experience under pandemic conditions. We have to make sure that we don't lose this crisis as our platform to launch a different way of looking at how to support children in their growth and development. Because the bottom line is, each of us develops differently, and we should be teaching in that way. And we can't do that if we don't change the ways that we measure individual success. I hope we'll seize this opportunity.
And Jan, we will go to you, but then I want to have Tim weigh in on children with special needs, if you wouldn't mind. And Maurice, be thinking about the fact that we came into this program as researchers, and we're asking questions about how to study this. So how do we prepare folks to kind of look at this and to chronicle the development of children in a way that gives us data to make good decisions on? So we'll have.
I'll be relatively quick. As I think about what Ann just said and what Linda said, you know, you have 180 kids in one day, and you have and demands. I think the demands on teachers today are extraordinary. I can't even imagine teaching anymore, frankly. And I think about something Faye said earlier. We must make sure we're giving staff and teachers adequate time to be trained in whatever it is. And we all know that often that doesn't happen for teachers or staff. It is 15 minutes after school, 30 minutes before school, 45 minutes. So somehow we have to figure out how we can give teachers, number one, the time they need to be trained, not just to be told what it is, but to have time to practice it. But they also, and you know me and my buttons, modeling matters. If the people doing the teaching of the teachers are not modeling what they're teaching, then that's a major problem. So as schools of education, whether it be the Yale School Development Program staff, whether it be whoever coming in to work with teachers, whatever it is we are teaching, we need to make sure that we model that in our own delivery with staff. So I'll stop here, but modeling does matter.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And Tim.
Tim.
He may be frozen.
I don't think he may be frozen.
All right, well, Maurice, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. While we're waiting for Tim, I just wanted to also mention that school leaders, people who are being trained, the pre-service educational leaders are also very important to reach with Dr. Comer's ideas and philosophy. And, I teach a course to school leaders in preparation on learning theory applied to educational leadership. And Dr. Comer's theory figures very prominently in that course. And it's amazing to me and very gratifying to me that many of these students are very eager to learn more about Dr. Comer's work and his ideas and his philosophy, because many of them traditionally have been exposed to sort of the broader learning theories, the traditional learning theories, but the developmental pathways and the theories that Trey and Jan and our colleagues have talked about have not been as taught and has not been as widely distributed in higher ed classrooms as as other theories. And so these students really find this to be a very novel and invigorating approach to learning theory. And so one of the things I think we also need to think about is how do we also get people who are being prepared to become principals to understand and value what Dr. Comer is talking about, because they're going to be very influential in how their schools, operate when they become school leaders. So I think that's a very important group of people to focus attention on. So I just wanted to, in addition to the classroom teachers, I think looking at how we also get Dr. Comer's theory to education leaders is very important. And by the way, notice I said Dr. Comer's theory, right? And I said Dr. Comer's theory because I am promoting Dr. Comer's ideas as a viable theory of learning, just like Vygotsky, just like other folks who talk about learning theory. This is a learning theory that needs to be taught, and to be taught as a viable theory because the research backs it up. We've done, Valerie, as you mentioned, we came in as researchers and we documented the importance and value of Dr. Comer's work. And I think that we have tested all the hypotheses that you can test about how this work works. And so I think we need to begin to talk about the Comerian theory of child development, looking at developmental pathways as being central to that.
Amen to that. Tim, I think we've got you back online now. Your perspective.
I'm not hearing you.
I don't think we can hear you, Tim. So we'll come back. We'll come back. This is a question for Dr. Brown. This question, well, there are two questions that I think we can tie together. One of the questions is, what are your thoughts on attachment theory with regard to academic achievement? And what early pathways might support parents, teachers, and communities to focus on and support child development? So attachment theory with regard to academic achievement, what early pathways might support parents, teachers, and communities to focus on and support child development?
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think Dr. Comer has a way of talking about this notion of attachment. He has a way of saying that when we look at developmental theories, we understand that children learn, young children learn through imitation and attachment. And so first of all, it will be with their parents, with their mothers in particular, but with their parents, the people who are their first teachers. They become the people that infants really tend to, Jan just mentioned a while ago, the notion of modeling matters. What they do, that's what children tend to imitate. And in terms of the relationships, form those attachments to people who demonstrate care for these kids. And this goes straight into the classroom because it starts at home with young children. It continues into the classroom with our preschool kids or kindergarten kids, where they form attachments with their teachers. And so those learning actually starts through those relationships at first. If young kids do not feel as if their teachers care about them, right away, that is setting the foundation that they are not going to feel that sense of connection or connectedness in the classroom that is going to serve as the foundation for their learning. And so the whole attachment theory and bonding theory and imitation is so important when it comes to classroom practices, where teachers really have to build those relationships with kids so that kids feel that my teacher cares about me. I feel attached to the teacher. I don't want to miss a day in school. And that is actually one of the things that actually comes out for young kids. And when that starts with young kids, and it develops, it goes into elementary kids in terms of 4th, 5th graders, and then middle schoolers. You know, a lot of people believe that when it comes to middle school kids, that schools are experiencing great challenges with middle schoolers. As recently as a couple of days ago, a principal was talking about that. And I was saying to the principal, you know, one of the things that's happening to those kids is that they are going through developmental changes that they don't even understand themselves. And they are looking for the adults around them to provide support for their understanding and their processing of what it is that they're feeling and what it is that they're thinking. And when that is not provided for them, they look for it elsewhere, with peers, with other teens out there that they're connecting to. So attachment is so important for learning. Imitation, modeling is so important for learning. And when that is established in the classroom by caring teachers, we see the big difference and the outcomes for our students.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think in the time that we have remaining, we probably only have time for this one last question. So everyone can weigh in on this. And this kind of gets at a little bit of what Tim was talking about earlier in the segment about some of these kinds of issues that are still remaining that we wrestle with, and that ideally we can use the model to help us to address. So this questioner says that there is a rising data that shows that teachers are more likely to see Black children as aggressive and suspend them at higher rates than white children for comparable behaviors. Given that the majority of teachers are white, how can we better protect Black children from racist experiences in schools and also hold adults accountable who are perpetuating racism? So Dr. Levitt, I'm going to toss this to you first, but anyone else, please feel free to take this on.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we know is true. And it's how we're socialized. It's why we're seeing some of the same behaviors in our everyday life. So it happens outside of classrooms just as it happens in classrooms. We must teach respect for and knowledge of cultural differences. Doesn't mean that we go out about our lives holding people to standards or having expectations for them because we have nothing.
That's great.
It is simply a matter of how we've been socialized to expect.
Can you hear me?
Those
Jason,
kinds
I wish I could. We could go on for. Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, that's Tim.
Yeah.
Oh yes, we can hear you.
So I'll stop for Tim, but I do believe it is a matter of education.
Okay, I'll be
and helping people understand how their beliefs play out, how their beliefs manifest themselves in their daily behaviors. So it's a matter of making sure that people understand what's happening and why it's happening. That's the only way we're going to be able to solve that problem. We have the same issues when it comes to Black girls who are pushed out and who are often labeled based on being assertive or taking the leadership roles. So I think it's a matter of helping us see the behaviors, recognize what those behaviors are and our responses to those behaviors, and how we also classify them differently based on who engages in the behavior. Same behavior, but a different perception. We have to acknowledge it before we can address it. So I think it's a matter of education and then responding appropriately from there.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. And Dr. Comer, we'll give you the last word. Would you kindly close us out from this Q&A session? What are your thoughts about how we apply these principles evenly to make sure that all children are treated fairly, equitably, and with respect?
After 50 plus years of talking, I'm worried about the ability to talk our way into better conditions, and believe that it has to do with structure. And in the preparation, especially the preparation of educators, but the preparation of leadership in all of the structures outside of education, and trying to find a way to work with parents so that parents can become leaders for child development and educators. But also, we're going to need the economic communities and political communities also to begin to think that they are a part of the preparation of children and child development and the preparation for life. And that everybody has to be involved in some way, and we have to think about that. I think Hugh Price mentioned locked in a conspiracy, and that parents, that people in all the adults around the children are locked in a conspiracy to make certain that the children grow up and develop and have the capacities to function well in the society. And that's the only way that a democracy will work. And that conspiracy has to start, I think, with the way we prepare educators in particular, because educators can work with families very directly, and they prepare the next generation of children, but they themselves are the modelers in a system that has the purpose of preparing children for the next generation or to function well as adults. And so educators are critically important, I think. I think it's happening, but I think it's not conscious enough and it's not deliberate enough. And we have, but if educators are to take on the key role, then educators need the kind of support.
Can you hear me? I'm not. Can you hear me? No.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can, Tim.
But I don't know what. Sorry.
We're going to ask Dr. Comer to just put a period on the end of that sentence.
Yep.
We are at time.
Something must have gone wrong with my connection. I apologize.
Yes, and we're just so thankful that you were able to join us. We feel your heart. We know your work with children who have special needs. We know of your desire to work and promote social and emotional learning, your long history of advocating for children. So we thank you for your time here. We thank all the panelists for their time and their focus on this, and also the contributions that you've made over the years in your respective roles to the Comer process as it has unfolded since 1968. And most importantly, we thank you, Dr. Comer, not only for this wonderful program that we're talking about today after all of these years and talking about our personal experiences, but we thank you for giving us a platform for sharing this work and for bringing this work out into the world from our own different perspectives and disciplines and the sectors that we work in. So to Dr. Comer, we give you thanks for your work. To all the panelists, thank you for your time and attention. And to the foundation, thank you so much for your wisdom in launching this series and for including Dr. Comer among the scholars to be featured. We hope that everyone listening has been inspired and enlightened and motivated to keep children first by the words that you've heard in today's webinar. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you.
And I thank you all.
Thanks, Valerie. Great job.